In nearly every settlement, county or province of a substantial size and with a rich history, a book of local ghost stories, folklore and legends will eventually be compiled, documenting the oral storytelling history of the area. Often, these books have a small print run and find themselves in the dusty recesses of charity shops or libraries. I make a habit of seeking out these volumes, as they often contain stories which were only known anecdotally to begin with and would likely disappear completely within a few generations. The stories in this video come from the 2018 book, Stories of Ulster, as well as some additional online research. Good evening, my name's Edward King Thompson, and welcome to another video. A few miles from the village of Rathfrland lies the rural townland of Ballyroney. The most significant feature of this area is the small but picturesque Ballyroney Lake. Its still waters, however, hold echoes of a long-forgotten tragedy. As the story goes, many years ago, a brother and sister lived on a farm in Ballyroney. They were good friends and had a close relationship with one another, neither wanting for anything. However, as the girl reached adulthood, a young man entered her life and fell in love with her. It is unclear whether the man was also local to Ballyroney, but the pair planned to marry and move elsewhere. Unfortunately, her brother did not take kindly to this news and forbade them to marry. He refused to even let them see each other ever again. Perhaps there was something about his sister's lover which he disliked, or maybe he acted out of jealousy, fearing that their close friendship would never be the same again. Well, he was right. Shortly after these events, the girl fell into a deep depression. She was, unsurprisingly, heartbroken. Years passed by and eventually her fiancé emigrated to another country. At some point in time, the girl decided that she couldn't continue living. In the dead of night, she crept out of the farmhouse and drowned herself in the waters of Ballyroney Lake. From this event onwards, the brother was haunted by his sister's ghost every night, in a desperate attempt to escape her, and the guilt he felt for driving her to take her own life. The man travelled to Scotland for harvest season. However, even as he sailed across the Irish Sea, her ghost haunted him aboard the ship. The girl continued to do so for the remainder of his work in Scotland, and followed him again to Ballyroney. Filled with paranoia and dread, the man grew hopeless, believing that he would never find peace as long as he lived. And so, one night, he too waded into Ballyroney Lake and drowned. I couldn't find any more information about this story besides what is listed in the book. It's a perfect example of the type of local anecdote that can quickly be lost forever in just a few successive generations. Ballymacarrett is a now defunct railway station on the Belfast to Bangor line, near Sydenham. It is perhaps best known now for a chilling paranormal encounter which occurred here sometime in the 1900s. I've been unable to pinpoint the exact date of the story, as accounts vary, but based on several details, I estimated that it occurred in the first half of the 20th century. On a cold November evening, a railway signalman finished his shift and stepped out of the signal box onto the side of the track. There was a dense fog hanging over the line, and the man held a lantern before him to find his way back to the station. The 7:30 train from Bangor had just passed by when he heard what sounded like footsteps behind him. Turning around, the man spotted the figure of a young woman approaching him through the mist. Upon arrival, she greeted the signalman and explained that she was taking a shortcut to the city centre to meet her cousin. The pair walked back along the line to Ballymacarrett station, whereupon the man led her through to the exit and bade her good night. Signing himself out of work, the man made his way to the local pub, the Aero Bar at Bridge End, to to meet up with a few of his workmates. As they fell into conversation, the man mentioned the woman he encountered on the tracks that night. Who was she? One of them asked. She said her name was Harvey or something like that, the signalman replied, unable to remember her first name. He described her as having straight dark hair and being in her early 20s. Are you sure her name was Harvey? His colleague replied. His friend then explained that on the evening of the 21st of February 1896, a gruesome discovery had been made on that very stretch of railway. A local man, finishing his shift, stumbled upon the mutilated remains of a woman lying scattered over the rails at the junction. The corpse was severed in two, and body parts were spread over a distance of 50 yards. The following day, the remains were identified as one Catherine Hanvey. She was a young, single woman who had been working as a domestic servant for a house on the Lisburn Road. At the time of her death, she had been living with her sister in Montreal Street, and that evening had left to visit some friends in Hollywood. A punched third-class ticket from Belfast to Hollywood had been discovered in her pocket, evidence that she had boarded the 7:30 p.m. train. Strangely, she had somehow fallen from the train, either by accident or perhaps in an attempt at ending her own life. After falling from the carriage, her body had been hit by several trains, resulting in the grisly scene the young railway man discovered. At the inquest, the coroner concluded that Catherine Hanvey came to her death from injuries received by an engine and train passing over her. After hearing this tale from his colleague, the signalman dismissed any connection between the story and his own tale, finished his drink, and got up to leave for home. Stepping out of the pub, he checked his pocket watch to see how late it was. The hands had stopped at 7:30 p.m. Probing the dusty recesses of the Belfast Forum and other dated sites, I found several retellings of this story, and they were generally very consistent with one another. There was some variation in specific details. For example, in one version, it's a local of the Aero Bar and not the signalman's colleague who relays Hanvey's tragic tale to him. In another, the signalman gets Hanvey's name correct immediately, which is, to me at least, more compelling than the versions where he thinks her name was Harvey. If the name he remembers is just similar to Hanvey, the implication is that a connection is being manufactured, whether it's just coincidence. A living woman with an adjacent name who just so happens to be roughly of the same age and appearance to Catherine Hanvey. Finally, the detail about the stopped watch appears only in the version of the story on the Whitehead Railway Museum's YouTube channel. It's such a brilliant climactic beat for the story that you have to seriously consider whether it was added on at some point in order to make the tale more exciting. Regardless of all the doubt I've just cast on the authenticity of this account, Catherine Hanvey was a very real person, and her death, just as harrowing, gruesome and tragic as any horror story. May she forever rest in peace. The forest of Ballyboley lies to the southeast of Larne in County Antrim. The sprawling, evergreen woodland surrounds Killeen Reservoir and has reportedly been steeped in mystery for many centuries. Locals believe the site was historically associated with druidic activity and, rather disturbingly, ritual sacrifice. Supposedly, up to 30 people went missing in the area between the 15th and 17th centuries, never to be seen again. Scattered throughout the forest are the remains of several ancient stone structures which, according to local folklore, are the altars where druids sacrificed both humans and animals. In recent times, visitors to Ballyboley have reported sighting mysterious robed figures, hearing blood-curdling screams, seeing blood on the trees, and thick black smoke rising above the treetops. One of the more bizarre phenomena reported in Ballyboley is that of temporal distortion. Some visitors have reported that time seems to slow down, or that they lose track of it completely. Perhaps the most famous paranormal account from Ballyboley is a first-hand experience of someone who camped in the forest on a Duke of Edinburgh expedition all the way back in 2005. The story comes from Spartacus533 on Reddit, and is as follows. So, in 2005, when I was 13 and in my third year of my secondary school, I took part in an outdoor team building scheme called the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme. For anyone outside of the British Isles, it's when you go on an expedition, hill walking and mountaineering in groups of about 6 for 2 nights and 3 days. It's normally organised by schools and churches and also involves charity work and skill building exercises during the year. When you're 13, you're eligible for the bronze level, and in my area this involved a reasonably straightforward walk with the exciting but daunting prospect of camping for one night right in the middle of a local forest, Ballyboley Forest in Larne, Northern Ireland. Now, I wasn't the fittest of kids, but it was with a group of friends and it turned out to be good fun. The first few days involved nothing more exciting than navigating fields and hills, and it went without incident. On the last night, we ended up camping right in the middle of Ballyboley Forest with all of the other groups. It was at the very foot of a fire break, a long, thin stretch of ground with no trees, which means you can see for quite some distance with nothing hindering your vision. There were no teachers or leaders at this campsite, so naturally, all hell broke loose. At about 8:15 p.m, as the light was beginning to dim, someone in another group began to ramble on about seeing people at the other end of the firebreak moving about between the trees. In case it was another group who had gotten lost, a few of us marched up the firebreak to check it out. It was about a 5-minute walk, and there was nothing but more trees and shrubbery, not a road or natural footpath in sight. It wasn't taken very seriously until about half an hour later. We were all gathered around a gas stove having hot chocolate, when someone else noticed some kind of movement down at the far end of the firebreak. This time, the figures that had been previously sighted were holding some kind of torches, but this is where it got a bit stranger. Rather than modern torches or mag lights, the figures seemed to be holding what were either branches that had been set on fire or some kind of oil lanterns that you held out in front of you. We counted 4 of these figures. This is important to remember. Someone later that night, who lived on a farm and would therefore know a bit about this, claimed that after the figures vanished, they could hear sounds like an abattoir in the distance, echoing cries and squeals of animals. Needless to say, after the figures vanished, our young imaginations ran wild and we began to assume the worst was about to happen. In a small and very religious country like Northern Ireland, you are brought up hearing of stories of the witchcraft and devil worship that supposedly takes place in secluded forests, and it took a lot of discussion and freaking out before we decided that we should ring the nearest teacher with our group's emergency mobile phone. But eventually, more rational voices began to pipe up and assure the more frantic campers that it was probably just other groups in the forest. The firebreak stretched very far back, about 1 kilometre, and we decided the best course of action was for everyone to go to their tents, keep torches handy, and stick together. The next morning, save for a few rumours of figures and lights being seen running around the tents, we laughed it off and carried on with the expedition. Eventually, it was rarely spoken about, and it became one of those stories that, as you get older, you find yourself struggling to remember if it was real or just a dream. Fast forward 8 years. Now 22, I was flicking through articles on Facebook when I came across one called 10 Most Haunted Forests on Earth. It contained some of the usual ones, like the suicide forest in Japan, but I was amazed to see Ballyboley Forest was included at number 5. It mentioned the usual paranormal activity that describe a lot of old places, but it intrigued me enough that I decided to research things a bit deeper. Then I came across a website called The Shadowlands, which documents real ghost and unexplained stories in Ireland. In its segment on Ballyboley Forest, it explains how locals believed it was the site of druid rituals and sacrifices, and how some of the stone formations and trenches they created are still there. But every hair on my body stood on end when I read what was next. On another date, 1997, this is actually in a newspaper report, 2 men say that they were in the forest when they heard a loud flapping sound They thought nothing of it at first, but as they continued walking, they started to hear other strange sounds, like a lady moaning in pain. Their horror began when they came to a place where the trees were smeared thickly with blood. As they fled in terror, one man looked behind him and saw 4 human-shaped figures in the forest, standing motionless, not pursuing, where previously there had been no one there. 4 figures, like the 4 figures with the lights we witnessed 8 years previously. Other sites report the practices of Druids involved the creation of altars to sacrifice animals and then set them on fire, which goes some way to explaining the abattoir-esque noises someone claimed to hear. It was so surreal to read, so long after the event took place, such eerily similar accounts and descriptions. What do you think? After researching the geographical history of Ballyboley, I am inclined to believe that the majority of folklore surrounding it is artificial and emerged fairly recently, perhaps even in the internet age. Most of the websites discussing the supernatural legends refer to the forest as being ancient, with strange activity dating back many centuries. In truth, however, Ballyboley Forest was only planted in 1957. The trees are an exotic evergreen species which would have been unknown to the Druids or anyone else who lived contemporary to them. This of course does not discount the possibility of Druidic activity in the townland, but it does dissolve the notion of Ballyboley being observed as a singular location in centuries gone by. Before the planting of this woodland, it was just a series of nondescript hills. Using the Prony historical map viewer, I examined several of the supposed Druidic altars. Most of them are labelled as cairns or standing stones, and they date from the Neolithic and Bronze Age. This places them centuries and even millennia outside of Druidic times. There is one megalithic tomb just outside of the forest, which has been colloquially labelled as the Druid's Altar, but again, this dates from the Neolithic era. All of this is not to invalidate the reports of strange and unsettling activity occurring in Ballyboley. Rather, it raises more questions. There certainly seems to be a strange, pervasive atmosphere over the forest, and the anecdotes from locals and visitors alike certainly warrant further investigation. It's just that the current skin which has been pulled over the folklore in an attempt to encompass all of the unexplained phenomenon is the wrong one. There is something happening in Ballyboley, but the question really is, what is it? Ulster is a strange and ancient province. There is no townland, hill, valley, or forest without a tale of darkness and despair, which may once have been rooted partially or entirely in truth, but over many years has been engulfed, moulded and fundamentally changed to become a legend of the landscape. These stories enrich the cultural heritage of rural places, colouring them and blanketing them with an atmosphere which must be experienced to be believed. Ghosts are so very real. They live in our oral storytelling, in our yesteryears, and the darkest, foggiest recesses of our shared cultural memory. Through it all, they will always haunt us, and they refuse to die. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.